Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, Ari and Big Mike are proud to present the greatest podcast in the world. No snowflakes allowed, and summer is coming.
And boy, are you people going to love our blooper reel.
Oh my God. The amount of shit that I fuck up in here, it's like ridiculous.
It's the podcast that was started by two guys on cigar night. So, we were discussing last time Queers for Palestine, which seems to make as much sense as chickens for KFC, but we're explaining why that makes perfect sense from a certain point of view.
It still doesn't make sense to me. I know we did the first episode already, and now we're on the second episode of this topic, but I am still confused about Queers for Palestine. You're like, you literally make as much sense as like a guy like cutting himself up so he's bleeding and then jumping into shark-infested waters. That's what Queers for Palestine sounds like to me.
Well, a few years ago, Dennis Prager was on Bill Maher's show, and he talked about how the left believes that men could menstruate. And the entire audience laughed like he said the silliest thing in the history of the world. But then, a couple years after he said that, people have been called transphobic and other phobic or whatever because they believe that men cannot menstruate. You go to some schools, and there are menstrual products in the boys' room.
See, I've always had an issue with the terms phobic. Like, don't tell me I'm transphobic or homophobic or whatever. Like, okay, if you're against Jews, you are considered an anti-Semite. If you don't like somebody of color, black, brown, yellow, red, whatever, all of a sudden you're a racist. But if I don't like somebody who's trans or gay, all of a sudden I'm phobic. I don't get that. I don't understand the logic of the definitions because I can be against something. I can not like something, but not be afraid of it. For instance, there's certain people's cookings who I can't stand because they're horrible chefs. But that doesn't mean I'm afraid of their food. It just means that I don't like eating it. It's like a simple thing. Like, I don't know why we need to overcomplex all this. And it's like, to me, it gets to the wording. So the wording then puts a certain connotation to it, which then makes you feel something. Now, all of a sudden, if I don't like homosexuals, I'm now feeling guilty about this. Instead of being like, I just don't like something. And guess what? And with this, I'm going to pass it back to you. I don't have to like everything. I don't have, the way the Constitution was written, I don't have to like what you're going to say. This is where, let's take about freedom of speech for a second. I don't have to like what you're going to say. However, I do have to respect that you have the same freedoms and rights that I do, where you can spout what you want to spout by the mountaintop. That's what freedom of speech is. But then, now we're so far to the, what the hell is going on here that we've lost our way. Why does it matter who you go home with, right? It's like, I remember when Philadelphia came out. Remember that movie with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington? It was like, people were screaming, there was a lot of people protesting that movie, and it was like Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and all this other shit. Why do you care who I go home to sleep with? What does it matter? And that's the problem, is that instead of being like, just normalizing life. Listen, I believe in the Torah. I believe the Torah is true. I believe in that the Old Testament of the Bible, for those who are not Jewish, that's where I'm at, right? And in there it says homosexuality isn't sin. Okay, great. So is stealing. So are a lot of things that a lot of other people do. So when they bash, gays for being against, because God, God's against gays, it's like, no, God's against you doing a lot of immoral shit that you do during your life. When you steal from the government, when you steal from somebody, it's still stealing. But we don't bash you for it the way you were bashing homosexuals. So yeah, there's a reason for these things.
I guess the question then becomes, at least to to get into this mindset. What is the world going to look like after the revolution? After the utopia that they propose is going to look like. And if you read old-timey and even new-timey leftist writing, it is a world completely unlike anything that exists right now. One of my favorite examples to bring up is an old French leftist from the 1840s, 1830s. His name was Charles Fourier. And he proposed that after we bring in the revolution, the oceans would be turned into lemonade. He literally said that.
Okay, and I've got a contemporary of Suleiman the Great who talked about how, he says, our holy book talks about how we want to make the entire world into a caliphate. You know, Jerusalem is but the start. And I remember seeing that in this documentary, how that was like one of his generals who said that, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was, or so, was he Suleiman the Magnificent or Suleiman the Great, whatever he was. You know, he's the guy who got Jerusalem back from the Christians after 100 years. So.
No, you're thinking about Saladin.
Saladin, that's right. Thank you. See, this is why I'm bringing it up to you, so you can correct me. So Saladin's general said that. It's like, he's not wrong, and he's, you know, it's been said thousands of times over. That's what Islam is. Their eventual goal is to, you know, control the world.
Right, but Fourier had something completely different in mind, because a religious person saying the world is going to be fantastic after the Messiah or after the redemption or whatever is saying that these miraculous things will be miracled into existence. Whereas Charles Fourier, who, by the way, hated the Jews like any good socialist.
But of course.
Charles Fourier was nutty as hell and somehow believed that some natural process would cause the oceans to be made of lemonade. And to be fair to Charles Fourier, the oceans being made of lemonade is being taken out of context. But if you look at it in its fuller context, it's still nutty as squirrel poop.
I mean, I'm just saying the man was probably doing some opium or something. I was just talking about that. He was like, you know, he wasn't.
But he's not unusual for a far leftist. For example, Trofim Lysenko. Do you know who that is?
Who?
Trofim Lysenko.
I've never even heard of him.
Okay, Trofim Lysenko is
I don't even know if it's a girl or a guy.
Okay, he's a man, and
a
one
man.
Of the worst people.
Are we assuming he's a man, or is he really a man?
Okay. The guy starved 1 million people to death.
I couldn't pass that up. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. So he starved 1 million people to death. He proposed that genetics was basically capitalist science, and that plants would be good socialists if we only showed them how. And he had a process called vernalization.
Plants?
Plants. Yes,
Plants.
he was an agronomist.
Like the green stuff that grows out of the ground?
Like the stuff you grow in your fields if you want to eat it and survive.
They would be socialist.
Yes, exactly. So he said if you plant the wheat seeds really, really close together, they won't steal from each other because these are good proletarian plants and they're not going to steal or whatever. And he had other processes by which he said he can essentially turn anything into anything you want it to be. For example, he claimed that he could get orange trees to grow in Siberia. Plants, according to his way of thinking, were as flexible as he wanted to be. And this is very, very convenient for a socialist or communist way of thinking.
How would an orange tree grow in Siberia?
It can't. But it's very convenient for a communist way of thinking. Because can mankind, as it's currently constituted, get communism to work? No. There's no way that people are going to work as hard as they can and then take only what they need. There's just no way that's ever going to happen. But if you say we're going to transform humanity into new socialist man who's going to be able to do anything we want it to do, anything we want him to do and behave any way we want him to behave, then Trofim Lysenko is your scientist. You see? But it's even worse than that, because if you don't become what we want you to become, it's your fault. It's your fault for not being what we want you to be. So we can use whatever force we want to get you to become what we know you can become.
You know, I'm gonna, talk about something a little like weird in this for a second, but I think when you look at people who understand human nature, one of the people in the 20th century who I think understood human nature a lot better than most was a man by the name of Gene Roddenberry. You know who that is?
Yes.
Right. And for those listeners out there who don't, he's the guy who invented Star Trek. Like, that's the guy who did it. Now, mind you, I'm not a Trekkie, so I don't know all the ins and outs of Star Trek, right? I'm just going to be straight about that. It's not something that I've seen. I know there's like 10 different series on Star Trek, which we're probably going to get. Someone's going to tell me in the comments that no, there's 8 or 12 or whatever, but whatever. It's like, what did he understand? What is the backstory on how the utopian society that Star Trek is started, right? It came after a major war that killed 2/3 of mankind. That's how he got to his utopian society. That's the backstory of Star Trek. In order to get to utopia, you first have to go through some serious pains. And I don't see it happening any other way. In the recovery world, in AA, NA, that kind of thing, they talk about there's two ways to keep people in line, right? One is through love, and the other is through pain. Very often those two intermingle, and I see it a lot.
Well, if humanity is going to be transformed by living in the new reality, that is essentially what the left has been preaching literally for 200 years. The East Germans, of course, tried to prove that to the world by taking a bunch of little girls, teaching them how to swim, then injecting them full of anabolic steroids, and having them win a bunch of gold medals at the 1976 Olympics.
I know, right? Oh, listen, I'm not a small fella, but some of those gals have bigger shoulders than I do.
So humanity is going to be changed by living in the society that is created by the left. And with the lemonade oceans or whatever, they're not joking about how much society is going to be changed. Now, I have no doubt that every single member of Queers for Palestine believes that a man, through the powers of self-identification or whatever, or surgery or hormones, can be transformed into a woman, into a genuine woman.
We don't have that ability yet.
We don't have that ability, but I guarantee you, if you ever ask somebody who holds a sign saying Queers for Palestine, can a man become a woman? I don't think you'll get a single person saying no.
I mean, listen, you're talking the same line of like Sigmund Freud, who said that 98% of the world was bisexual, and that only 2% of the population was either solely straight or solely gay, right? Like, you're going into things like that. Like, how do you prove such a statement? How do you even say like such a thing? And it's like human nature is such that, like, you really look at societies throughout the generations, right? And you look at who they're praying to. If you look at the Norse gods, from Scandinavia, right? Their gods are violent. That's where the Vikings came from. It's like that was their religion, the Norse religion. Well, look at the Romans and the Greeks and what they believed, right? Their gods were idiots, who like had so many issues and were arrogant and were filled with hubris and just whatever. Like, they had the failings. Zeus couldn't keep his Johnson in his pants. It's like that was a common thing in ancient Greece. Like, if you cheated on your husband and got pregnant, oh, Zeus did it to me. It's like Zeus knocked me up. Oh my God, I have a half goddess in my wife's belly. Like, really? Like, it showed a lot of society, right? It really did. In our society, we've taken God out of everything. and we've put it into man. Man is greedy, man is painful, man is shameful, man is filled with joys and happiness, man is filled with good and bad. But we are neither and both at the same time. So it's the more I understand about Queers for Palestine, the more I'm seeing that it's more about power.
Oh, yes, it is.
And like, it's a lot of people who are hurt and are looking to twist it around to where now they're on top versus being on the bottom, being like, I'm not going to get beat down by you anymore. I'm going to beat you down. It's vengeful and it's revengeful and it's more human nature. So, listen, we're going to continue this in the next podcast because there's a lot that we're still going on. We're keeping the podcast shorter. So, I want to thank you all for listening. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and good night, and I don't know, just have a great day.